The next hour or so, we're going to talk about management and business strategy. One of my colleagues who I met about 18 months ago in Denmark at one of their AI kind of mini MBA labs, which I was teaching on, was a man nearly half my age called Matthew Blakemore, who is a very, very smart, genuine creative technologist who's a musician and who also is a creative Gen AI expert. And he came to Cambridge last summer and gave what we call at Cambridge a coach night for me with my cohort of MBA students. And I can remember saying when I introduced Matthew, I said, he's one of the only people I trust to talk about AI. And I still trust him, and we are together embarking on a project together called Snakes and Ladders, which is a book and probably a game and probably a 360-degree IP model to try to bring management and strategy to the right table when it comes to AI adoption and AI implementation. Okay, so there is a big thank you to Matthew for letting me talk about this in this last session. And obviously, Snakes and Ladders, it doesn't take a genius to realize that there's a high level of risk and a high level of potential reward. Okay. So what's this session actually about? I mentioned Professor Michael Porter this morning from Harvard. One of his great quotes, which I've never forgotten, is strategy is figuring out what you're not going to do. If only I had learned that as a younger person, it would have helped. Yeah. Strategy, figuring out what you're not going to do. Framing, management, and decision-making is so important. It does require a framework. It's a good discipline. It's good to have a framework. I see a lot of decision-making going on in small companies, SMEs, in production companies, in larger companies, where strategy is being made up on the hoof as they go along. It's reactive, yeah? It's, oh, well, we need to be doing this. Oh, we need to build this. We need a platform. We need a consultant. That last one is it's almost as bad as saying we need an agent. Yeah, so there we go. Yeah. And how to navigate, of course, between value creation, value opportunities, yeah, and that value is in all sorts of ways. I don't just mean that as a monetary value. I mean, for example, a happy workplace. I mean, where people who are working in your offices who are happy and content and actually rewarded and feel that they're on a good mission. One of the shocking things I found out when I was doing my last deep research for these sessions today was the attitudes that are being held by very, very hard-working people in Silicon Valley for AI companies, where they're so busy and they're working literally 20 hours a day on this AI speed race to beat China, to beat the opposition, to get artificial general intelligence, to get super intelligence. I mean, every now and again, they stop and think, maybe it could all go wrong. Maybe we could all be toast tomorrow. And they come up with platitudes when they're interviewed by people in press and trade, media. And they come up with this very, very vague notion that, well, we hope that AI goes well. I mean, Jesus, that is fucking scary, isn't it? We hope it goes well. Yeah? So, value creation and, of course, the pitfalls, the snakes. And some of what I'm going to talk about is busting some myths and exposing some lazy thinking. Because interestingly, what AI is doing as it has arrived so fast, so ubiquitous, meaning everywhere, yeah? It's amplifying and exposing and shifting existing risks and opportunities, both inside organizations, but of course outside as well in terms of either your competition or the ecosystem that we work in, which of course is what I've been trying to focus on a lot in terms of what is actually impacting the way that we think, deal, and value working in film and television. I was introduced to this. I wasn't aware of this being a whole academic field in itself, but growth mindset. growth mindset. I had no idea how much has been written about it and research, etc. A very smart woman at Cambridge introduced me to it when she said, can I speak to some top film producers about how they see growth mindset when they're working with talent, developing projects, working on screenplays, and bringing films to the big screen. She ended up hiring me to be an executive producer and has just made that film Blueberry Inn, the comedy in Yorkshire. So, as we say, it's a small world. Yeah. Most leaders and managers and decision makers don't just want to roll dice, yeah? They want to feel like they've made an informed decision. They want to feel that there's some kind of empirical value behind what they decide to do. Now, some of that is smoke, yeah? Being able to hide behind something to justify something. But actually, it's important to remember that that's their mind framework, because they think in order to achieve value, they have to be making decisions because they're scared of missing out, yeah? So, what is required with AI is some grounded knowledge, the kind of knowledge that we've shared today, yeah? What is it? How does it work? What is it doing? Where are the pros? Where are the cons? What are the issues? What are the values? What is it in some detail? And quite frankly, most of the decision makers I've met and interviewed are lacking in any real knowledge. Now, please, I've had time to sit down and read 40 or 50 books about AI. I've had time to read an awful lot of essays. Part of my work at Cambridge, obviously, has encouraged me to do that work, but I am genuinely curious about AI. They're looking for a solution before they've actually studied what it is. They're looking for the quick fix. The quick fix is a mistake, you know? They're also scared of missing out, yeah? So sometimes they need to be encouraged to make deliberate moves, strategic moves, rather than, oh, we just need to do something. We need to be seen to be doing something, yeah? Of course, they're looking to create advantage, competitive advantage. And they're in a hurry to see the impact of AI in terms of tangible results, whether it's share price, return on investment, cash flow, P&L, whatever it is. They're in a hurry. That's a big mistake with AI. If you make the wrong decisions by adopting or encouraging certain types of tools, or decide to introduce an extremely powerful technology across, for example, a company, rather than maybe bite-sizing and taking a project to explore what it can and can't do and how it's fit for purpose, then you might find that you've infected your entire business model. Or you might have infected all your staff. Yeah. Needs to be clarity of objectives. Very important, and I'll talk about this in more detail in a minute, about the talent and the roles. And of course, strategy is also about map making. Once you've decided what map you're not going to be on, or which territories in that map you're not going to invade, which ones are you going to stick with? Yeah? Very important. So the game board, as I said thanks to Matthew, the setup, the first thing to think about is context. Context. Why are you looking at these kinds of machine tools? What kind of advantages and things are you looking to get from them? Yeah? Both internal and external. And we, in the film and TV sectors, are facing enormous, intense pressure. People are slightly gobsmacked when I talked about Stranger Things and the kind of level of budgets, for example, that have gone up. And the idea that, oh, well, technology was supposed to bring everything down a bit in terms of budgets, and instead it sent everything further up. Yeah? What is interesting in my work across the gaming industry, which is a very different ecosystem and a very different community and culture to film and television. Gamers, avid gamers, are extremely possessive about the values of their games and their experience and what goes on in their games and how they are constituted and built. They have a very high degree of sensitivity. They are hawks with sharp eyes when it comes to the introduction of Gen AI tools, etc. Do not think it's all singing and dancing because it's a somehow digital-friendly community. No, It's a values-driven community that cares a lot about the quality and the experiential elements of being inside the games that they want to play. Yeah? The community is incredibly sensitive and very, very aware of the potential damage that can be done. Yeah? I kid you not. It is not a walk in the park dealing with the gaming industry in terms of its audience and consumers. Yeah? However, it is a live lab at the moment in terms of trying to understand what can be done with, for example, voices, second character generation. What can be done where you're going through an experience in a universe and you're able to actually see certain effects from the Gen AI really actually give you some pretty interesting results. Music, early AI adopter of the so-called enhanced catalog management. Look where that's got us with Spotify. One long noise. Noise. A real problem when it comes to curating in terms of Spotify. A real problem of a drift to exactly what I was talking about in terms of a flat world and a homogenizing effect. Yeah? Do not think that everyone is in love out there with Spotify. They're beginning to get sick and tired of the way that they are pushed and programmed into a push model. Yeah? That is not anything to do with the curation that a lot of music lovers like. Strategy has got to be tied both to product management and the reality of the audience that you are looking to reach. Yeah? It's not about tech type, something that every manager who doesn't know anything about tech immediately gets seduced by when someone is there selling them a certain type of tech, a certain type of software. Oh, well, that sounds wonderful. Big mistake. So, a little bit very quickly, and because I'm tired, I decided to not busk this, but I wrote a couple of notes down, so you'll excuse me. On my left is the AI winter. Yeah, that kind of Game of Thrones, north of the wall feeling. Yeah. AI went through from the 1950s, when there was quite a lot of excitement, when Turing and others started to try to explore what kinds of computer intelligence could be developed. The idea of a machine that could be intelligent, yeah, as smart as us, be able to recognize certain things, quickly fell into a very long quagmire of academic snow. It reminds me of what Henry Kissinger said about academia, that the worst fights and the most vicious arguments happen in academia because the stakes are so low. Yeah, thanks, Henry. What is interesting is, in my research, I came across a book written by Bill Gates in the year 2000, The Speed of Light. And Bill Gates, and I'll remind myself, decided that wouldn't it be brilliant if we started to use computers to develop, and I quote from him, digital nervous systems. That word nervous systems is a really interesting one because it's not a long jump from nervous to neural. Neural synapses. The idea that AI is actually, in terms of its chips and modeling, is built around our brains rather than code. Code is binary. Code is sequential. What's really important about this as we get to the development of AI is when we start to move into a parallel computing system where many different things are being connected at the same time by multiple chips. Yeah? You following this? Because it took me a while to catch up, and I'm with you. This is complex stuff. Yeah? Then we moved, with Geoffrey Hinton's help and some of the very brilliant researchers that he worked with, into not just parallel chip moves, but we moved into transformers in 2017, which NVIDIA also had a significant line of inquiry and research in. Okay? That's when transformers started to help AI machines and the parallel kind of chips start to recognize images, objects, recognize patterns, and of course this suddenly opened up the monsters that required training. And the net of course, was scraped for as much training as possible. One of the really interesting things as we speak today in 2025 is they're running out of training material. Hence the need to license and start to do business with content creators and data, et cetera, and start to do bespoke models rather than generic scrape as much as you can. Yeah? So the world is slightly changing here. But that gives you a sense of where we got to in terms of the neural networks and this idea of a transform position rather than a binary one. Yeah? These are very, very powerful tools. And whilst I may not be very technically gifted, it is particularly interesting to see the shift from binary code to what neural networks can do. So I wasn't joking when I said this morning that ChatGPT 3.5, way back in the autumn 3 years ago, had the synapses and neural networks of a cat. I'm not quite sure what we'd want to call ChatGPT 5 because that seems to have gone slightly the wrong way. And as Sam Altman said, it's still proving quite tricky to get things right and still improving. Yeah? So, recognition, creation, with all these things and all these tools, also increased unpredictability. Yeah? Very tricky. Unpredictability where it knows that it needs to give you an answer and will give you an answer without having any common sense, as I pointed out this morning, or it's in such a hurry to be able to give you something, it gives you something that actually isn't worth the gibber it's typed on, precisely. We've all had that experience, haven't we? You remember I said that the trouble with models is that they're not necessarily good sources of innovation? Task-driven programming is there to give us answers. And again, that's very seductive, but it's also quite problematic. Yeah? Past failures are far from over. Bias, there's been some fantastic research on bias, absolutely inherent in all the scraping, and of course all the people who have been doing some of the programming, whether it's education, race, politics, etc. Yeah? It always amuses me at Cambridge that we had a company called Cambridge Analytica. Yeah. People should be turning in their graves. Yeah, precisely. We talked about hallucinations, how AI lies, makes things up to get out of prison of the trap that we've been set, which is it has to, apparently programming-wise, give us an answer. Yeah? The hype we've talked about, and of course, what happens often is by managers and strategic engagement, botched deployments. Market facts, there's some big ones here. I'm not going to run through them, but you can see that we've got an enormous amount going on, a massive surge in terms of market values, okay, a huge amount of prediction of growth, yeah? Interestingly, by the end of 2025, fewer than 3% of production budgets at major US and EU and TV studios are allocated to Gen I tools for direct content creation. This has not taken over our world. 3%. It's not changed everything. It hasn't arrived in full. It's not dominating everything, okay? It's growing, and it will grow, but the idea that there's been a complete avalanche in terms of film and TV is not true, yeah? What is interesting, of course, is there's been a much bigger amount of operational spend using apps around what we call the invisible tools, yeah? The background stuff. So, what is it like to be a manager at the moment with AI? That's how they're feeling. It's shit. What do? We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. It seems like there's an awful lot that we need to learn quickly. I'm too busy. That's, by the way, what we get from a lot of people. I'm too busy for this. Who do I delegate this to? Who do I pay to be able to implement this? And then we get back to the consultants. Yeah, precisely. Headaches and anxiety. What is interesting, and it's a point that Matthew makes really well in his work, is when we get tech in search of a problem. Think about that. It's what I mean about, and in fact it was why I was asked by Screen Flanders in particular, and VAF, before you all made the commitment to come today to be with me and to be with each other, why I was so careful to write something about values and why I'm not paid and propagating and trying to sell or push any AI models. Yeah? That is very, very important. Independence is incredibly important. Here we go. 46% of UK AI project failures lacked a business problem fit. Wrong tools for a different challenge. Oh, but at least we were being seen to do something. That ain't good enough. That's a big problem because, by the way, every time you get this wrong, your staff and everybody who works on projects together goes, what were you thinking? Of course they do. So trust goes down rather than goes up. It's like, what? This is the Wild West. This isn't helpful. This is particularly important, the idea of tech, which we've spent, of course, what they don't want to tell you, but it's out there. The cat is out. Billions and billions of dollars developing. Is now running around trying to find a use and a purpose, isn't it? Precisely. Beware the seduction of innovation theatre, waste, distraction, and misaligned expectations. These are all classic business strategy errors that are being made. What are the foundations of good governance? Avoid promises and visions that are ungrounded. Assess your team's true capabilities. This is really important. We all know what it's like in small, medium-sized enterprises. He or she or they who shout loudest get heard. Oh, we've got to do this. Oh, have you seen that? Oh, we need to be seen to do something. What is your team's real capabilities, okay? Business-centric strategies may not be necessarily the point. It may be about your culture. Is your culture AI ready? Is it fit for purpose? Is there some underlying setup that's required? Some basically making sure everyone's on the same page. Avoid we need an app, yeah? Humans are always going to implement these things, at least so far, yeah? What do I mean by implementing? Implementing as in? Yes, what I mean is, when I talk about CEOs, COOs, chief technology officers, what they often say to consultants or creative technologists who understand AI is they need to be seen to be doing something. So they say, can you build us an app? They don't know what the app's going to necessarily be used for, but they need to be seen to be doing something. So let's build an app. And the app ends up being exactly what I said, technology addressing the wrong problem. It's not fitting into the business need. Yeah? That's what I mean. Okay? Great. This point, and it comes back to our overriding theme of human in the loop, it is us who's actually going to have to carry the can and do the work to get these things into the right place and to monitor them, to assess them, to engage other people, to trust them, to learn how to harness them. Yeah? And as I said, beware external consultants. Having done quite a lot of consulting myself, I can speak from experience. Quite often, it's a rigged game. You're employed as someone who's supposed to be independently thinking, independent not just of thought, but independent from the organization that's hired you. But they already know the answers that they want, and they drift and drag you towards giving them the answers that they think they want, rather than listening to you as an independent consultant. I'm in the middle of one right now, where I'm dragging one way, and they're going, no, 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 this is what we thought we want. We don't want to hear your ideas. But here's the evidence of why this approach is, no, but we want this. Oh, I know you're supposed to be independent, but never mind, we've paid you a lot of money. I'm like, it's not about the money, it's about the integrity of the thought and research and the empirical work. Wish we'd never hired him. Can you imagine? What I've just described could very easily take place when it comes to consultants who are pushing and selling AI models. Because in the end, they're selling the models. Yeah, exactly. I think, as I pointed out, that a limited control use case, rather than taking your entire company onto a new system, is a clever, smarter way of addressing how to start to engage, at least, with AI implementation and experimentation. I liked the example that I gave you of Hattrick, who instead of saying everything has to be done with AI, they're saying, no, here's an incubator system, here's a lab, here's a whole suite of tools that we've got an expert or a couple of experts to be able to help our writers, directors, producers work with, and let's play. Let's treat it like a sandpit. It's a sandpit, not thou shalt have to do it this way from top down, yeah? That immediately doesn't engender a sense of exploring, of learning together, yeah? It's learning by diktat, yeah? Top down, not helpful. And also this business about different departments. The danger is that the younger demographics, and especially the technology people, the chief technology officers of these companies, or, in production companies, the geek, yeah? The person who actually does understand tech quite well, end up driving the process and all the carriages, and everyone else plays catch-up, yeah? Actually, your legal department, your operations, your finance department, your data, and there's a big one there, your creatives, and your human resources all need to be considered, even if it's a small project. It should all interact and interlace with their inputs. Without that, you're going to tip over. Of course you are, yeah? So this business of are you AI ready? This is one that I think Matthew is very articulate about, but it's a really good question. Just a self-assessment list. What are your objectives? What are the skills you've got inside your organization? Data. Oh, don't get me started about data collection. Most companies either don't collect it or have got what we call dirty data. Yeah, much less exciting than dirty dancing. Yeah, exactly. I kid you not that a large amount of data collection is not fit for purpose. It's not necessarily passing GDPR rules, it's poorly collated, it's patchy, it's not being consistently applied, etc., etc. It's being kept on unsafe storage. I mean, yeah, I can go on, and I'm not a technologist, but if I can reel that lot off, yeah, then you know that there's something ugly underneath for a lot of organizations because they have not been addressing these things. And by the way, I talk about it as if it's a bit of a problem on the side. This is an endemic problem inside a lot of companies today. They are not AI ready because their data is shite, which is a technical term, by the way. Yeah. Stakeholder authority, that's an interesting one. Boards and managers and executive directors and non-executive directors love to talk about AI and AI opportunities. 57% of those boardrooms are still very busy in the US talking about AI and using AI to generate certain types of data and shared information at a boardroom level. Less than 10% of what is being discussed is actually being implemented. So there's a huge difference between what's being discussed and what actually is coming into the system, yeah? I think of these things, as you can probably tell by now, almost with a sort of anthropological hat on. Who are we as humans? How do we work, think, feel? How do we respond? How do we react? Yeah? And how can we make sure that we work together in terms of communities and teams, yeah, to make sure that there's a real psychological and cultural buy-in so that people are genuinely engaged in the most positive way. And also, it's acceptable to go, I hate it. Because you know what? Quite a lot of companies are so rigid about feedback and any crossfire that you are effectively non persona non grata at the point that you go, I don't like it. That's an issue. It's also an issue when it comes to projects and project management. When you think about producers who might be very geeky and very clear and keen on adoption of certain types of Gen AI tools on set, both in pre-production, production, and post. Post they probably have slightly less say over because it'll depend a lot on where the post is and who the post-production supervisor is. But even if you took my value chain analysis this morning, are they carrying everyone in the same way? Because you know right now that everyone's going to have different knowledge skills, different tools they like, different tools they don't like, different tools that they've never heard of. Can you see how uneven that jagged frontier is? Yeah? So it requires a lot of discipline to make sure that you are really AI ready. And some of this is definitely anthropological. It's not just business models and numbers and finance return. Yeah? This is a good one. You know, in my research for Human in the Loop, for Cine Regio, what was really interesting was being pushed quite hard, quite rightly, by Cine Regio on public funds and public agencies. And I explored quite carefully both the Swedish Film Institute and VAF itself, one of our funders, obviously, and the main producer of this event, along with Screen Flanders. And what was really interesting is that these bodies had really actually thought this through, that they actually had clear written rules and guidelines and a policy that had been set. But I can tell you now that there's a bunch of agencies in the UK that have no idea at all, and that there are many, many organizations out there that do not have any types of AI rules, strategies, values, approaches which are shared consistently with everyone in the organization. So hats off to VAF, hats off to the Swedish Film Institute. And I know that the other body that I mentioned that I work with closely, Fumivast, also has very clear AI kind of guidelines and rules. But this should be normal now. We're 3 years in. This is the stuff that people needed to have engaged with. Yeah? There needs to be some parameters, some guidelines, some things that everyone is at least on the same page. Yeah? So here's a tricky page, but it's worth spending a little bit of time and humoring me. We've got snakes on the left, and we've got ladders on the right. Let's start with this. How? Outsourcing. We talked about consultants. It's not just outsourcing to consultants. It's outsourcing to people who may be directing you or helping you make decisions, but don't have to take responsibility for the results. That's the problem with outsourcing. It sounds great. Oh, we're delegating it. Oh, it's off the overhead. It's off balance sheet. It's just a consulting cost, or it's just an expert's cost. You know what? We can all dream up a bunch of stuff when we're consulting and go, here's the report, and do a Scooby-Doo. Who, me? And you're gone. You know? Yeah, the Scooby-Doo effect. We know that one. Consulting blindness, their own bias. Also, I'll bet you that over the last 3 to 4 years, a bunch of those so-called top 5, whether it's EY, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, etc., they've been all learning on the job, on the consulting jobs they've been doing for companies and organizations, messing it up and learning as they go along. It's called in AI reinforced learning patterns. Yeah? But of course, they've been doing it as consultants being paid while they learn and as they trip up and go from screw up to screw up. Yeah, reinforced learning. Brilliant. Over-delegation. Again, it comes down to that sense of responsibility and delivery. When a film producer delivers a film, he or she or they are absolutely responsible for every element. Yeah? That's a huge, huge level of responsibility. Without successful delivery, you cannot exploit all that work that has been done over many years properly. It's entirely possible to come up with a bunch of stuff for AI implementation, and then, as I said, disappear. Yeah? Vendor lock-ins, that's an interesting one. Vendor lock-ins, well, we'd really love to be able to help you with your AI solutions and problems, but we need to be locked in for 3 years. And suddenly you're codependent, and you're now listing over to one source of expertise, one source, self-interested source of suppliers, etc. Big issue. Lock-ins, not a good idea, not unless you're in a British pub and it's locked in until about 6 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, the rest, forget it. No quick wins. Key performance indicators, that kind of, slightly geeky management speak. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I need to study it. I need to understand it. I need to understand how AI is starting to kick in terms of what KPIs look like, how they might be re-envisaged, how they're measured. What are we measuring? Why are we measuring it? Are we measuring it accurately? What are the inputs? Yeah? Very important. Are they aligned with the company's objectives and sense of growth and targets? Or in fact, is it overloaded? Are you trying to make all sorts of middle managers catch up with all sorts of results when in fact they should be getting on with their normal job. Yeah? Uncanny value issues and box ticking. Oh, we've all heard about the diversity, inclusion, and ethics. How easy it is, and we've had a lot of rubbish from companies in the last 3 years. Yeah, we are ethical, tick. Yeah, we have policies about responsibility, tick. What? Who's actually measuring that? Who's checking that? Did that actually happen? OpenAI has loads of these policies, and look at the way they've shat on all their staff. I kid you not. Okay? So, beware of the box-ticking exercise, yeah? This one about alienating creative inputs, it's an interesting one, isn't it? This is tricky because let's take a film project, and you've got 2 writers, one who is quite keen on using a certain type of input from some Gen AI, and the other writer who's absolutely against it. What does the producer do? Does the producer say, well, sort it out yourselves? Well, that's not going to work, because it's quite clear they've both got certain value, experience, and ethical and creative issues about these tools. One of them clearly doesn't want to use them. The other one clearly has already started to not rely, but perhaps experiment or work with them. What does one do? Of course, the other problem is that anything that the writer who is using Gen AI doesn't actually declare, and you find that, in fact, quite a lot of the material was originally Gen AI initiated, has no copyright protection. And is the writer going to own up and go, I've used a whole load of Gen AI and it's been brilliant? No, they're not. They're going to put their hand down and go, well, this is my work. You see, the problems of transparency are opaque. They're not nice and crystal clear, are they? It's tricky because it requires us to be quite honest and open and collaborative in the true sense. Because right now, we have this strange paradox, don't we, about AI? We have on the one hand going, wow, it is really extraordinary what it seems to be able to do very quickly, and it is a tool that you seem to be able to sometimes use really effectively. On the other hand, you're looking at it thinking, wow, it got that wrong, and it does this in a strange way. And actually, I'm not quite sure if I want to tell the other people I'm working with that I kind of use it, but I use it behind my back. I don't really want to tell them. So I use my private account at work. And I use a bit of data from the company and, input a bit of that. Now we're in the big problem that everyone is beginning to wake up to, which is we do it on the side, we do it privately, and we screw up GDPR, and we screw up our company data that's supposed to be protected. You see the problem? And that is happening everywhere. Yeah? Not just on projects, etc., but it's happening everywhere. Yeah? Tricky. Compromising outputs and quality control, things that we talked about already. Crucially, the last one, not engaging with regulation. Now, regulatory rules and challenges are tricky. We're going to come to them. It's going to be slightly heavy, but we'll deal with them. At least they're going to be addressed here. But also, regulation and regulatory challenges, to implement and enforce them, requires teeth. Teeth sharper than those dinosaurs' teeth at the beginning of today. Do I see much regulation that has real teeth? Not in the EU. We're back to Scooby. Yeah? Well, we've got all these rules, and in fact, we've now just decided to park the bus rather than drive the bus along with the EU AI Act, because we've had so much lobbying, and it seems like we're being accused that we're against business and growth and innovation. So someone's been drinking the Kool-Aid, because I can tell you now, Silicon Valley, however ugly it might be, it's got one hell of a lot of lobbyists, and they are like snakes everywhere. Everywhere. So something is going on here where we're misaligned rather than all aligned, and regulation does not have teeth. You can make mistakes and get things wrong, but actually playing catch up in terms of how to be enforced, that's a problem. Now let's look at the positive stuff, the ladders. Always good, isn't it? Yeah. Here we go. So good objectives definitely are well worth figuring out when it comes to strategy. What are we trying to achieve? Where are the potential benefits? What are we not going to do with Gen AI or AI? And what are we actually going to try? Let's make something that's disciplined, a little bit more focused. What are our direct links to market? Yeah? That's crucial. Don't delegate intent setting to scientists, okay? That's important, okay? And work up strategic and creative KPIs. Definitely well worth it if they're well organized and not too pressing and demanding, but realistic. That's fine. As I said, clean up that data. That's so important. In fact, when we talk about public funds, for example, the data that public funds collect, some of it's really, really interesting because it is not the same around Europe. When it comes to film agencies, when it comes to film funds, it differs. What different agencies collect have different drivers, different models, different emphasis. Some of that is to do with the political environment of the masters that be, the people who, the ministers of culture or whoever it is in terms of the political system that funds those bodies. But again, being clear about what you're collecting and making sure you're collecting it as ruthlessly and as well as possible, and making sure that you're storing it safely and that you're measuring the things that you want to measure and you know why. And you're attaching weight to that data. You understand why it matters so much. It is a footprint in lots of different ways that's important. So make sure it's clean. And if you're not clean, clean it up. That's more important than having some wacky, big new Gen AI kind of initiative. Start with the basics. So revise your data collection and your remit. And then something else that I learned from Pixar. It's really hard to do this on films. It's hard to do it on projects. A post-mortem. It's a bit like giving birth. It's like, oh God, I've given birth and I'm absolutely tired and exhausted, and I just need to just feed the baby. Never mind about what happened at the birth. Now, there's good reasons why we don't remember the birth, I'm sure. I say we collectively, okay? I am a man, yeah. I confess that I don't know what it's like as a woman, of course, to give birth, but having experienced it 4 times as a man, I can see that there's a lot of trauma, and there's no reason why any of the people who gave birth would want to necessarily go back and do a post-mortem, but it's crucial. And Pixar have made it a business, a brilliant business, of learning what they got wrong, learning from failure, learning from the experience. Their big, big success, what is it? We're about to have the Toy Story 4 or 5, God forbid, 25 years on, the anniversary of Toy Story. Actually, Toy Story is instructive because it nearly broke the company. And Toy Story 2 did almost seriously break the company because the creatives and the technologists fell out. And what Ed Catmull, the president of Pixar, insisted on was a serious post-mortem to bring the company and the teams back together. How can creatives and technologists work together? What have we learned from the fact that this film, this project, broke our back? And that is a really important process. And this is what we need to do when it comes to even the smallest implementation of new Gen AI adoptions, different projects, different usages and use cases. We need to pay attention to them. Yeah, we really do. Because it could be like an infection or it could be like a solution. We need to know and calibrate carefully and measure that. Governance transparency is important. What rules have you set up? And crucially, governance isn't a one-size-fits-all. Governance may well mean, where are you operating? Are you operating here, out of Brussels? Are you operating in a different EU territory? Are you operating in the UK, which of course post-Brexit is completely separate and has different rules? Are you operating in the US? Are you operating in China? Ooh, don't get me started. China, a whole other can of worms. I had the privilege of being invited to the Beijing Film Academy as a visiting professor, only to find that I was cut off 2 years later because they decided that I was American. Now, I don't know whether it was an algorithm or whether it was the political pressure, the fact that they decided it was easier to get rid of me, but it's interesting, isn't it? Who makes these decisions, yeah? DeepSeek was a shocker when around a year ago it was launched, and it showed that the enormous levels of investment in Gen AI tools and AI did not necessarily have to cost as much as was being spent. I'm not suggesting that DeepSeek is a better model, just saying it's really interesting when we see how groupthink and the train's direction can suddenly actually be challenged by an outlier. Yeah? Now, of course, the Chinese political system and the way that it's governed is different. But it is really interesting when you see the innovation and the models that they've come up with, which are truly surprising and challenging. Yeah? So governance is not a one-size-fits-all. Governance means working out where are you using the tools, where are you situated, who are you answering to in each part of your business and where it is registered. Yeah? That's so important as well. Aims and refs, we're going to come to those in a minute. Yes, the maze of regulations around AI. Now, the one thing as a caveat, just quickly to point out here, is, of course, legally, it's been really difficult to get any precedence on copyright, for example. But even then, copyright has different applications and rules in different territories, okay? So you need to remember that and this maze and the complexity. So they're local, they're national, and of course, there are certain global but fragmented and uneven rules as well. Let's start with the EU, the EU's AI Act. Now, apparently, it's supposed to be binding globally, yet it's highly susceptible, as I've pointed out, to the tech lobby, and is now on what we call a pause button. Yeah, tricky. The core concept, it's got a 4-tier risk-based framework: unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk. It's got a general purpose AI model where foundational models must disclose training data sources, label AI-generated outputs, and if deemed high impact, undergo rigorous testing and monitoring. Interestingly, there's, however, and this is the word, voluntary, tucked away down here on the little left bottom, a voluntary code of practice, which provides compliance guidance. So on the one hand, we say that it's a binding AI law, and on the other hand, we have the word voluntary. Well, which is it? Oh, it's on pause at the moment. So do not think that this is reliable or clear. Now, the United States, which of course calls itself pro-innovation, pro-growth, market-driven leader, hates China, we've got to beat the Chinese, haven't we? Jesus, all of those stuff, yeah? It avoids a single AI law. Instead, it relies on executive orders. God, we've seen how they've gone with Trump, haven't we? Multiple executive orders have been made in the last year. Agency oversight and there's that word again, voluntary. Voluntary framework, so we're all okay, aren't we? It's all fine. Everyone's going to volunteer the right way, not the wrong way. Fair use. Currently being claimed as a defense by tech companies with regards to training on models. The Fed government, Trump and co., is trying desperately to stop state regulations which have much more draconian or tougher laws about responsibilities, ethics, and regulation. They want one size fits all. Yeah? Fair use, just to explain, is effectively hiding behind the idea that it's good for the public use. It's good for education, it's good for learning, it's good for advancement. I mean, Jesus, how long is a piece of string? Yeah? That's what fair use effectively means. So, of course, it's already had a number of cases in terms of search, and Google, which has already tested this and won on the grounds of search and some of the information that's there and able to be used by Google on the grounds that it's good for everyone. AI has jumped on that precedence and said, yeah, but we're also good for everyone. The law of association. Yeah, exactly. Innovation, innovation, innovation. Whilst apparently safeguarding trust and security. Well, I might have believed the Biden administration's executive order, which emphasized responsible AI development, but we're in the world of deregulation, and wasn't it interesting when 4 or 5 of those titans of tech, the 5 horsemen of the tech apocalypse, were sitting almost next to Trump at his inauguration? I mean, talking about sucking up, you know? Yes, precisely. Okay. There are frameworks. They're interesting frameworks. There's one called the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. It was released a couple of years ago. Whilst it's voluntary, it's actually a very useful one to be able to help you as an organization govern, map, measure, and manage AI risks. It's actually become a framework much more widely used than we hear about. So this is interesting because there is a little bit more responsibility going on, and this framework is pretty straightforward to use. Unfortunately, there's a lot of divergence out there. Japan, in terms of AI at the moment, has no rules. All bets are off in Japan. Yeah? China, as I said, is extremely centralized. The UK is a total mess, as usual. Yeah? And it's pulling away from the creative industry. It's basically drunk the Kool-Aid of opt-in systems. You have to opt in, you can't just opt out, etc. Blah, blah, blah. The latter, be ready globally. Avoid the snakes of regulatory conflicts in your own organization. Be aware of them. Be mindful about them. Here's the risk management framework. The govern bit, establish AI governance structures, assign roles, align with organizational values and regulations. Map making, identify and assess AI risks throughout the life cycle. Understand context, capabilities, limitations. Manage, implement risk controls, mitigation strategies, continuous monitoring. Address risks actively. Measure, back to the data, quantify AI performance, fairness, security, data, quality, and assess the risk levels and trade-offs. These are the 4 core functions. This is a pretty smart, robust framework. If I was running a company or going to set up a company, I definitely would have a very careful eye on exactly this, and I may well have to implement exactly that framework when I start to be responsible for millions of dollars as an equity fund investing in film. That's a framework I'm going to need to look at. Yeah? It is up to us as actors, meaning not as obviously as a performance artist, but as an actor, a responsible individual running a company, as a director, to take this seriously. So, we talk about knowledge and skills. You know, today, obviously, there's quite a lot of AI literature or literacy that we've talked about. Yeah, different types of terms and knowledge. But what I'm witnessing is a lot of informal learning, very informal. I'm not suggesting it all has to be centralized, but we need to start taking this really seriously. Yeah? I see a lot of unstructured and often relegated to prompting only. A lot of, oh, well, as long as you know how to prompt, you're okay. Well, let's just analyze that a little bit more carefully. Yeah? There is a section in Human in the Loop, in the book that we've shared with you, which has a section on prompting, and I did find it really useful having to research it, and some of it is based on the training that I got from a couple of very, very smart technologists. And it makes you think, when you're getting trained about prompting, what's really going on. And it starts to put your relationship with the technology into perspective. You have to ask yourself, what is it that you're actually doing? You're using and harnessing a very powerful tool. It's a bit like having a chainsaw when you chop down wood and then split it again with an axe. But in this case, you're splitting and splitting and splitting and splitting. Because the art of great prompting is to take it step by step. As I pointed out earlier, giant prompts, mega prompts, are not necessarily where we should all be starting. Prompting is also about curiosity. It's trying to figure out what you want, what are your intentions, but it's also being very critical and very, very focused on the answers the machine are giving you. It's no good going, oh great, I got that job done. Look, ChatGPT gave me an answer. Fantastic, it must be right because I asked it all the right questions. Not so fast. You need to go back. And some of it I think of like building scaffolding on the outside of a building. If you take it slowly, it's amazing what you can get to, but you're effectively building up layers. Layers of understanding and knowledge and research, but constantly applying a critical eye to it, yeah? And a sense of responsibility of, could I actually let this out of the building or rely on this at the highest level of work? Not, do I get away with it? Getting away with it isn't good enough. That ain't helpful. It's got to be your standard setting, yeah? So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that co-piloting and prompting skills aren't important, okay? Although we keep being told by technologists that, oh, well, the machines will be able to prompt themselves soon. Let's just think about that again. The machines will be able to prompt themselves soon. So in other words, we're now in a system where the machine has taken over and is already guessed or is given a certain amount of instruction and runs forever with it. That's a little more uncomfortable, and we'll come to why that's a real problem in a minute, okay? Simultaneous team learning across departments and skill sectors. This is really important. This is about management commitment. This is about inclusiveness. It's about fairness, yeah? This is about making sure everyone is actually on that same page, yeah? And why together? Risk obsolescence, fragmentation, and industrial disputes, as we've pointed out. Do you know what the management offered, Hollywood management offered the writers when the WGA came out on strike initially? They offered an annual conference to talk about the advancement of technology. One conference, one a year, no mention of anything to do with copyright or ownership or theft or even the business. Just an annual conference. And a few months later, Bob Iger, the same Bob Iger who I said had the smarts to be able to set up Disney Plus and start to deal with Netflix's challenge, came up on the same week as he was paid a $50 million bonus. He said, I think the writers are being unrealistic about their pay award intentions. This is 50 million plus to Bob, but the writers are being unrealistic about the threat that AI. I mean, talk about hubris. Yeah? No wonder Hollywood is on fire. Yeah? Exactly. Most importantly, fear. Fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of threats, fear of being found out, fear of it going wrong, fear of being left out or jobless, or losing your agency, as I found out when talking to creative workers. The biggest fear was the sense that Gen AI may threaten their roles, their value, the value that we apply and give to writers who are able to write compelling material, directors who are able to capture and externalize the script and bring it to life on screen. These are extraordinarily highly talented skills and crafts and visionaries, yeah? Fear of being sidelined, relegated, replaced. These are all very real emotions, very real concerns amongst many people. Now, the fact they haven't come to light necessarily, when I gave you that astonishing figure of just 3% actually real engagement with tools, doesn't mean to say that they're not going to encroach, yeah? But the fear is a big one. And if the management itself doesn't know very much about AI and is not informed and is not doing the legwork to catch up, then you can see why workforces won't necessarily have trust, okay? So what does talent management mean? It means giving people agency and meaningful work. It means them having a voice that you actually hear. Diversity in a real sense, not just an input and a box to tick, yeah? Play and explore, my hat-trick example. Access to tools and suites. Tools and implementation have to be bias audited, yeah? Inclusive and regularly updated. Post-mortems, come on. Needs to be done properly. IP, training data has been stolen en masse. Copyright's no longer fit for purpose and was already uneven. Generative AI outputs are now shifting to an opt-out, not an opt-in. Licensing market, a legal precedent is slowly evolving, watching brief for all of us. And by the way, isn't it interesting? We heard a lot about the strikes a couple of years ago. They're coming back because those settlements were only for about 3.5, 4 years. And we've gone through about 2.5 years of them. So whether it's an annual conference, which I don't think it will be, I think there's going to be a bun fight coming again. Okay? So watch that space. Talked about KPIs. It's interesting, this risk modeling. Return on investment scenarios are important for management. But often, as I pointed out, it's very unreliable when it comes to prediction and forecasting. It depends a lot on the quality of the data. a lot of the assumptions and the inputs. Remember, garbage in, garbage out, yeah? Add social value and demographics. Don't just go for the numbers. How do we measure social value? How do we measure demographics properly? Who are we reaching? What ages are we reaching? Yeah? How would they skew the numbers? Add churn and creative burnout. Always use common sense. Check the predictions with logic. What is being measured? How is it being measured? Why is it being measured? What does it actually mean 360 degrees, not just a linear track on one focus? When we talk about IP, for example, one of the great things about really great stories is they can be retold, reimagined in a number of different formats. Yeah? We see amazing musicals. We see extraordinary things made from plays. We see radio shows suddenly becoming amazing films. Yeah? We see video games, as I said, in terms of The Last of Us, sometimes when they're really brilliantly adapted and you have people highly skilled and craft brilliant working together across different formats, which is how The Last of Us actually came about. The game's originator and a filmmaker clubbed together to make that work, which is why that universe became so compelling to watch. It's really interesting, but how do we measure that? Do we make sure that we're catching everything, not just the main frame? Creative KPIs, what do they look like? That's interesting. Is there a talent drain on your company? How often do you work with the same talent again? Is that a good thing? How do you measure these things? Very important. And as I said, postmortems matter. In fact, it'd be quite a good idea if management started to do a pre-mortem. What could go wrong and what can we do right to be AI ready is where I was talking. Yep.
The company that I worked for several years ago, we did mid-mortems.
Mid-mortems.
So in the middle of production, we had this implemented that there was a space where we could change tack.
How interesting, a mid-mortem. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Like a midwife. Yes, how interesting. Okay. Not a bad idea, a mid-mortem. Okay. So some of this is about value setting. What does your business stand for? And I'm not talking about Google do no evil, who of course announced that many years ago and have done a shitload of evil since. Yeah? We are aware that we can get bent and twisted and pushed out of shape by large language models, large action models, generative AI, machine learning, yeah? Because they deliver repetitive outputs, they undermine differentiation, and they promote a flat world, homogenization. All things that I have researched and proven today for you, yeah? Oh, I've gone back. Let's go forwards. Yeah, I wanted to bring this up. Sorry, it's a little crowded, but I didn't want to get through this day without talking about power. And I'm not talking about the power of the 5 rings, or the one ring to rule them all. I'm talking about the scale of AI's infrastructure. It is truly a monster in need of a huge feed, no matter what you're told or what you're sold, okay? So a bit of research I did very recently, last week. 62 terawatt hours, TWHs, used by AI data centers in 2024 equaled 71 nations' electricity use. The bottom 71, as they call it. I didn't like to use the word bottom, but we're talking about the GDPRs of the lowest countries. That's mega, massive. That's a huge drain, yeah? 165% rise on that demand by 2020. That's the equivalent of Japan's entire annual electricity consumption. This is not small. That's 120, 130 million people in Japan, yeah? In a high westernized economy. AI data centers are scaling up and are using 100 megawatts of power. Latest are requiring 2,000 megawatts. That's the equivalent to 2 million households' annual usage. $1 trillion is needed to support the AI infrastructure demand rollout. And guess what they've started to do? It's like a Ponzi scheme. They've started to buy each other's shares. And they've started to borrow to build. Ooh, but this is a good bubble. isn't it? We're all, it's a good bubble. Oh, of course, Jeff, it's a good bubble. Yeah. Can't possibly go pop. No, no, no. So codependency is now in the system. Oh, don't even get me started on water. In fact, that reminds me, I really need a drink. Yeah. Water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. Yes, precisely. I was just scratching the surface here, but you're quite right. This is the alarming bit. We've already kicked the environment and turning green and all the agreements that we made along the road, bang, and this is coming along. But there's one thing that you'll have seen in all those big papers, the FT, The Economist, all the things I read, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Every week, there's a quote from someone high up in terms of Silicon Valley infrastructure saying, it's not a problem because AI will fix it. This reminds me very, very uncomfortably of a show in the 1970s which had on BBC a person called Jimmy Savile, and it was called Jim Will Fix It. Yeah, those of you who know will know just how tawdry, tragic, and sad. Don't worry, we'll fix it. Be careful what your dreams are when they come true, precisely. Are business and industry and shareholders worried? If you read the financial papers properly and you read what's happening with shares, there is, if you like, a codependency Ponzi scheme going on. No question. Everyone is on the verge of a nervous breakdown before NVIDIA releases its last results, which of course were flying through the air upwards, yeah? Because of demand for their chips, because they effectively are, here we go, AI will fix all these problems, but just in case, can anyone tell me what this picture is? Anyone? Come on, it's late, I know, but use your imagination. Where would you go if there was a nuclear war? To a nuclear bunker. And guess who has a nuclear bunker? Don't think Jensen has one, but the rest of them do. It's one of the things that they all have in common. They all have a nuclear bunker in case things go wrong, which is supposed to inspire us with confidence. It's either a nuclear bunker for Ellen or it's a rocket to Mars, which luckily he owns, so he can get a one-way ticket to Mars if things go really wrong. But I kid you not, the masters of the tech titan world all have nuclear bunkers. Dream on. So how do you win this game of snakes and ladders? Trust. Trust is a really important word. Fairness, transparency, deployment effectively, auditing properly, shareholder engagement, open reporting. But the trust with everyone we work with is incredibly important. Very important, okay? And my friend here who is almost finished Empire of AI, Karen's very good book. Karen, by the way, did a large amount of work at MIT as well as a journalist. Her last chapters are about the water and the land that is being bought up, not just in America, but in huge swathes of South America, Africa, to build these enormous power stations that are like mega multiple stadium after stadium after stadium to be able to power AI. That's where we're heading. Yeah? Huge swathes of territory and water and resources to be able to feed the monster. So, it's a serious game of life and death. It's a game of ongoing strategy, collective learning, responsibility, creative leadership. As I said to Kai, we raise children. Our footprints and prompts today will shape AI of the future. Anyone seen this book, Nexus? This is a very, very clever guy. Yes, you have. No? You're just waving, not drowning. Yeah. You hated it. It's pretty heavy going. We are, one at the same time, both the smartest and stupidest animals on the earth. Something in our nature compels us to go down the path of self-destruction. Now, 25, 30 years ago, you might have said, we're not doing so badly. Today, looking at the world, hot wars, cold wars, famine, green environment going down the drain. There's a lot going on that's problematic. But don't worry, because we've got some arms dealers involved in everything, so it'll all be all right, won't it? Yeah. Arms dealers, always good. Where we started this morning, do you remember when I talked about Jensen at NVIDIA? I got to the end of the thinking machine. It shows that you really need to read and pay attention and finish the book. No criticism intended. You've got to finish the book, because on the very, I think, second to last page of the thinking machine, I came across this quote from Jensen. No AI should be able to learn without a human in the loop. Music to my ears. Always have a human in the loop. Yeah? God forbid that Jensen said that. Well, there we go. With thanks to VAF and Screen Flanders, Anne and Katrien, and the wonderful work that was done by them on the book, and today, much thanks. We'll give them a round of applause. Really brilliant. And to some of the people who inspired me to actually get going on Human in the Loop, AI in the film value chain, that's Charlotte, who's here with us. Stand up, Charlotte. Big round, thank you. Very good. She's almost Flemish, she's so shy. Yeah, very shy. Matthew Amrish, my partner at Proof of Concept, my fellow writer at Cambridge University, the Danish National Film School, British Film Institute, and Screen Ireland. And also to those authors that I really did rely on, and I do rely on. So you can see that I thought 90% of my reading was slightly irrelevant, but 10% counted, and those are the people: Ethan Mollick, Karen Howe, Mo Gordat, and Dekai. Thank you very much. There we go, Human in the Loop. Thank you, guys.